If you're looking for a classic, easy to drink Irish single malt, this might be it. This week let me tell you about the Tyrconnell Single Malt Irish Whiskey. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Matt, I'm the Whiskey Nerd, and like I said, this week I'm looking at the Tyrconnell Single Malt Irish Whiskey. So let me get it into the glass and I'll tell you a little bit more about it. Now, the Tyrconnell is one of the kind of long-standing Irish whiskey brands in the country. It was originally founded by the Andrew A. Watt Company, or the Watt Distillery, a long time ago, and they named this whiskey after their horse. They had a horse called the Tyrconnell. It came in and it won a race at 100-1 odds, and they decided that they'd name their whiskey after it, hence the horse on the bottle. Now, that company, the Watt Distillery, has since closed, but the brand was taken over by the Cooley Distillery, and it very proudly says it on the back of the bottle that this was distilled in the Cooley Distillery, so not hiding it. It is kind of open and transparent in that regard. It is a double-distilled Irish whiskey. Now, oftentimes you'll hear Irish whiskey, it's distilled 3 times, and generally speaking, the reason for distilling something 3 times is that each time you distill, you kind of cut off the rough edges around the outside, leaving you with what you're aiming for in the middle. Now, some people will say if you distill it more than twice, you're kind of cutting off some of the flavors in the middle while you're also removing those rough edges. So there is a bit of a debate about double or triple distillation, but when it comes to Irish whiskey, since there's generally speaking no smoke or no real rough edges around the outside, you can distill something twice and still get a very light, flavorful whiskey. And that's what this is. It is a very light, very enjoyable whiskey coming from the Cooley Distillery. They do have a few other kind of higher profile whiskies under the Tyrconnell name. They've got an age statement of 10 years old. They've got port or sherry or Madeira finishes, and they typically come in at a bit more expensive. This, however, comes in at very budget friendly, less than €45 including tax. I actually got this bottle here, a 1 litre bottle, at an airport for €30, so you can definitely get it at a very budget friendly price, despite it being a very nice, solidly made whiskey. It does come in at 43% ABV, so it's not down at the floor. In previous years it did come out at 40% ABV, but they've recently done like a rebranding. They've changed the packaging a little bit and also bumped up that ABV to 43%. Not up at 46% where I might like to see it, but definitely a step in the right direction. It does have caramel colouring and it is chill filtered, so again, you know, we're talking steps here in the right direction. Hopefully we can get to a no colour added whiskey in the future, but right now they are being pretty transparent about it. They don't have an age statement on the bottle. They didn't say if it's very old, if it's young. From trying it a few times, you know, it's not very young, but isn't also old enough maybe to carry that 10-year age statement they have on their more premium releases. It was also aged entirely in bourbon casks or ex-bourbon casks, so it does come in nice and sweet on the nose and into the palate. And speaking of the nose and the palate, let's go in for the nose on the Tyrconnell Single Malt Irish Whiskey. Okay, immediately it's light, it's sweet. I'm also getting a bit of lemon kind of note coming out. It actually reminds me a lot of like a lemon drizzle cake, where you get a lot of that sweetness. You know, you get the vanilla, you get the grain sweetness, you get a lot of that kind of baking sweetness, but you also get that bit of lemony note coming through, because there is a nice bit of citrus coming through on this whiskey. I wouldn't say it's lacking in flavour. It's definitely very light, very floral, very kind of sweet on the back end. And I'm also getting a little bit of kind of apples and pears. If you're familiar with Irish distilleries, the Cooley distillation kind of practices, their malt comes out with a very apples and pears and orchard fruits kind of note to it, and it's definitely here in the palate. Behind that sweetness, behind the caramel, behind the kind of lemony notes, you do get that core of apple and pear. There is some creamy kind of vanilla notes coming through, but I'm not really getting, on the nose at least, a huge amount of spice or a huge amount of maltiness. It is a double distilled single malt, but it's not very heavy on the malt. It is kind of light. It's a lighter, friendly kind of approach of a whiskey. And it doesn't smell young. It doesn't really smell particularly young. It just smells Just smells kind of light on the nose. So let's go in for the palate on the Tyrconnell Single Malt and see if it stays as light. Cheers. Honey, a bit of lemon, a bit of caramel. Still quite sweet, still very kind of initially quite friendly, but I do get on the palate some malt. A little bit of oaky spice coming through, but definitely much more malt than I was getting on the palate. On the nose. As the palate kind of spread out with that honeyed sweetness, you get that maltiness kind of spreading out into your mouth. It's still quite sweet, it's still quite kind of light. It's definitely, I'd say, a little bit less fruity than on the nose. Like on the nose, I was getting apples and pears. On the palate, it's more that maltiness, the sweetness coming from the grains. Definitely like a little bit fudgy almost, with that little bit of vanilla and the sweetness coming from the grains. But I'm gonna go in again for a second sip and see what else I can find and see if I can find that fruit. Cheers. Definitely a bit of oak, definitely a nice amount of malt on the palate compared to the nose. Not really getting that fruitiness, not really getting any of that lighter kind of almost floral notes I was getting in the nose. A little bit deeper, still quite sweet. Almost getting like a little bit of a like an almondy note, like actually kind of like an almond, or like the icing sugar you sometimes see in some pastries, like a Christmas cake or like an almond croissant, where you get that little bit of kind of almond, or like in the bottom of a Bakewell, that kind of sugary almondy note coming through. And as I'm breathing, which is probably more into the finish, getting a very kind of creamy vanilla, almost like a white chocolate note. So I'm gonna go in again, but I'm gonna focus on that finish and see what I can find. Cheers. Okay, so on the finish, like I was saying, it's kind of light. It is quite honey, and you do get a lot of flavor there. It is only coming in at 43% though, so it's not gonna be the heaviest of finish. It's maybe a little bit short. It's not the longest of finishes. As you go in, you get that taste, you get the grainy sweetness, you get the oak, you get the malt. That grainy sweetness kind of fades off a bit quickly, leaving with that oak, leaving with that malt. Little bit of spice. I wouldn't say it's tingly, I wouldn't say it's spicy or that there's any heat at all, but just a little bit of that kind of oak spice coming through. And then as you breathe, as you take another breath or two, that oak spice fades off a little bit more, and you get that creamy kind of vanilla note. You get that kind of the white chocolate note is what I was getting. Yeah, definitely like a little bit of white chocolate. As I'm breathing, it's as if like I've taken a square of white chocolate, I've eaten it, and I have that little bit of a lingering flavor in my mouth. It's not, like I said, the longest finish, but it is enjoyable. Nothing really goes wrong in the finish. Before I give my final thoughts on this whiskey, if you're new here, scroll down, hit that thumbs up button, hit that subscribe button. I put out whiskey reviews on Wednesdays, and I put out whiskey cocktails on Fridays, so if you want to see those, make sure to hit subscribe. But for now, I think I'm going to leave it on this final thought, that this is a nice, easy to enjoy whiskey. It's very straight up, down the middle whiskey. It's not really taking any risks that could go wrong. It's also not taking the kind of risks that could make it into one of those greatest whiskeys you ever had, but it's also not really trying to do those things. It's a double distilled, single malt, aged in bourbon casks at 43% without an age statement. It's pretty much just down the middle of where it wants to be, and it's not doing anything wrong. So it's very much made an easy to enjoy whiskey. A bottle you can put on your shelf, you pour yourselves a couple of glasses of it, and you're not going to get upset. You're not going to be upset that you drank it, or even that you finished the bottle, because it's not very expensive and it is easy to enjoy. So while I enjoy this whiskey, let me know down in the comments what will be your kind of easy to enjoy whiskey. But until then, I'll see you next time. Sláinte.